Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this special meeting of the Planning and Development Council of the Town of Oakville. It's September 12th, 6:30 p.m. And Madam Clerk, I believe that we are all here and there are no regrets, correct?
Correct.
Thank you. Councillor, are there any declarations of pecuniary interest? Madam Clerk, I see no declarations. Council, our only item of business tonight is the Parks Plan 2031 and the Draft Plan Dedication Bylaw. And we're going to have an introduction by Neil Garvey, our Commissioner of Community Development. And we're also going to be able to hear from Gabe Charles, the Director of Planning, and Chris Mark, the Director of Parks and Open Space. Our consultants, Ron Palmer with the Planning Partnership and Matt Bennett of N. Barry Lyon Consulting are also here. And we have three registered delegations, Chris Kowalchuk, Teresa Ball, and Elizabeth Chalmers on behalf of Joshua Creek Residents Association, and Karen Brock on behalf of Oakville Green. Mr. Garvey, you have everyone's attention.
Good evening, Mayor Burton and members of council. Before we hear from Ron Palmer, I thought I would provide some additional color and clarity to what is before council this evening. For this, I draw your attention to the key facts found on page 2 of the report on tonight's agenda. The Parks Plan has been prepared as a result of changes to the Planning Act. The town's alternate rate of collection for parkland and cash in lieu of parkland is legislated to expire as of September 18th, 2022. Unless a new plan, bylaw, and policy are adopted by council before then, we will only be able to collect a fraction of what we currently do. Without a new plan and bylaw, our parkland standard of 2.2 hectares per 1,000 people is significantly in jeopardy. Tonight is not about the park types, locations, sizes, development, and designs. These will all be established by council through the town's official plan, master planning exercises, development applications, and other subsequent processes, and not through the Parks Plan 2031. Our goal here tonight is to establish a bylaw that maximizes the amount of non-tax revenue that can be invested in parks, that can be rationalized through the rules, with the understanding that parkland decisions related to the bylaw, including the bylaw itself, are now appealable to the OLT. And following Ron's presentation, Matt from MBLC, Chris, Gabe, and myself are here to address any technical questions that council may have. And I will now pass the presentation over to Ron.
Great, and thank you, Neil, for the introduction. Pleasure to be back here in Oakville at the beginning of September. I think we'll go to the next slide. I'm going to try not to duplicate too much of what Neil has already told you, but I'm going to try and give you a brief overview of what we've been doing and where we've ended up, keeping in mind that this project has been a really, I think, a good collaboration among the team of consultants, which included myself and Matt Bennett of NBLC, as well as many of your staff members who have worked very hard to get to where we are today. To begin, as I've said before, Oakville has a great park system. It has developed over a long period of time and been based on activities of council supported by staff, as well as a parkland dedication bylaw, which utilized the maximum amount permitted under the Planning Act. That's a very important part of what we're talking about today because the rules have changed. Next slide, please. Development in Oakville is also evolving. The future of Oakville is going to include a focus of significant new higher intensity forms of development within your strategic growth areas. And as such, not only do we have to respond to legislative changes, it's important that we are ready to accommodate and plan for appropriate urban park systems along with your wonderful suburban park types that you've achieved over the last 40 years. Next slide, please. So a couple of key legislative changes are fundamentally why we're here. Just very quickly, Bill 73 back in 2016 required a municipality to prepare a parks plan. The preparation of the parks plan fundamentally is linked to the ability to utilize the alternative parkland dedication rate identified in Section 42 of the Planning Act. It also added a limitation on the cash in lieu permissions that was a new element limiting the amount of cash that can be accrued through the development approval process. That was a fairly major first step by the province, requiring a study limiting the amount of cash in lieu permitted. Then in 2020, Bill 197 came along, and it talks about two things. The first one is that the bylaw that is the result of the parks plan can be appealed to the OLT. That's a very important element of the work that we've been doing. That requires that what we do is supportable, defensible at the tribunal. Secondly, as Neil already mentioned, there is a deadline for the new bylaw to be adopted by council of September 18th, 2022. If we miss that deadline, the only parkland dedication that the municipality can achieve, particularly with respect to residential development, is 5% of the land area. That's a big change from what you have been doing historically. It's also selling Oakville far short of your expectations for a robust park system, both in the urban areas and in your suburban context. So it is recognized because of these two pieces of legislative change that the approach to parkland dedication within Oakville also must change. Next slide, please. So the purpose of the Parks Plan, and keeping in mind it's a strategic document, is to establish a hierarchy of parks, various types of parks in a suburban context, and a different kind of hierarchy for your more urban context as it evolves going forward, as well as understanding how cash in lieu of those park elements may be achieved fundamentally to make sure that the town of Oakville continues to achieve its stated objective of 2.2 hectares per 1,000 people on a town-wide basis. The work that is in the Parkland Dedication Bylaw before you is our comprehensive response to these challenges and is intended to achieve that 2.2 hectares per 1,000 people on a town-wide basis. Again, the September 18th deadline is looming and is important to remember. Next slide, please. It's also important to note that the Parks Plan, as Neil mentioned, it's not really a plan that assigns land areas throughout your municipality or designs the parks or talks about all the details of those parks in terms of their function and their role within the campus of parks in Oakville. It's really all about using the development approval process to generate cash or land for parks generally. All of the details of location and design and scale and function will be dealt with in subsequent planning processes that will, of course, be brought before council for approval. It's also important to note that in the planning world, we are required to review all planning policies on all development applications that come before council with respect to any relevant planning policies from a provincial, regional, and local level. And it's very important that it's understood that the Parks Plan and the Parkland Dedication Bylaw are only two of that plethora of policy that is necessary to shepherd a development application from an idea to a built project on the ground. It's very important also that it's a principle of provincial planning that very all-encompassing approach is applied to every development application going forward. Next slide, please. So getting back to the Parks Plan, and this is a slide I talked about last time, the Parks Plan has 4 primary goals. We want to be comprehensive. We want to look at the entire town, and we also want to look at the elements of the urban structure that are going to accommodate significant growth going forward and how they might look into the future. We did an analysis of best practices for parkland dedication. A little bit difficult at this time because every municipality in the Greater Golden Horseshoe is going through this exact process. The provincial legislation didn't tell us how to do it. It just told us we had to do it. And what is included in the Parks Plan is really about a made-in-Oakville solution, utilizing the fiscal realities of development in Oakville, land values, and so on, and looking at, again, building on that great campus of parks that you already have. How do we make that better? How do we make sure that the urban areas, which may not deliver as much land per person, can still deliver enough land and cash in combination to ensure that 2.2 hectares per 1,000 people is still achieved townwide. We also want to talk a little bit about flexibility, and we did include in the appendices to the Parks Plan a full hierarchy of urban and suburban park types, along with some design guidelines that can help the town understand how they fit together and how they build upon the campus of parks and achieve that 2.2 per 1,000 people. Next slide, please. Just quickly, what we've done over the last little while, you'll recall that we had a presentation and a discussion back on June 14th. And at that point, we prepared and presented a draft Parks Plan and discussed it with you. Part of that conversation was trying to come to grips with the role of council going forward. And what is your role in achieving cash and land through the Parkland Dedication Bylaw, and how that will be utilized over time to achieve your park system. That was certainly discussed and included in the subsequent drafts. On July 15th, we had a meeting with the development community where they had a chance to go through some of our work and provide their commentary. I can tell you that in other jurisdictions, the development community has articulated a similar list of desires, concerns, and so on. And it gave us a chance to have a chat with them and talk about what we were trying to achieve and how that might be articulated in a new Parkland Dedication Bylaw. On August 8th, we were back here at Council. I was virtual that day. And we had a conversation about the new draft of the Parks Plan and including a draft bylaw for consideration. Certainly, we heard from Council, we heard from Build, and we heard from ratepayers about some of the things that they were concerned about and they were looking for in this document. Next slide, please. And over the last month or so, I have been working diligently with staff to try to overcome some of those concerns and to explain and make adjustments to the plan and bylaw that better achieves some of the objectives and concerns that were raised. So, before you tonight is a revised Parks Plan and a revised Parkland Dedication Bylaw. It includes the same basic topics as the last one that you saw, although there have been some substantial changes to that document. We do start with a calculation of conveyance, how that works, how to deal with parkland credits, how payment in lieu of land will be dealt with, how land values will be established and when in the process they are established, and then a number of administrative elements. Next slide. So some of the key points are we've prepared all of this work with the intent and the objective that we continue to achieve 2.2 hectares per 1,000 people in the long term. Beyond 2031, which is the objective for this work, and it will need to be reconsidered and discussed through ongoing work, ready for a new bylaw in another 10 years. The 2.2 hectares, just so everyone knows where that number comes from, that came from your Parks, Recreation, and Library Services Master Plan. In that plan, it talked about the relevance of the 2.2 hectares per 1,000 people, its ongoing use, until such time as a new Parks, Recreation, Library Services Master Plan is prepared that either increases, decreases, or keeps that target the same. We have promoted in the appendices to this document a full hierarchy of park spaces, what they look like, what they're called, how they might be designed. But again, no geographic allocation, nothing on the ground. These are not necessarily new. They're just more articulated and consistently defined. We want to empower the municipality to continue to use the alternative land ownership models on a site-specific basis of strata parks and POPs that are really important tools to consider in an urban context. Some strata elements may be appropriate for consideration in a more suburban context, but at any rate, what we're trying to do here is provide the tool without making any predetermination as to whether or not it's appropriate on any given development site. We talk about the strategic growth areas in particular. We start those with a minimum requirement for 12% of the land area to be in parks, but that's not the only requirement for those areas. We would be looking for additional parkland types. The 12% is really about the larger scale elements that you would find in a development plan, a secondary plan, something like that, whereas we'll be looking for additional park spaces in the smaller elements that may be POPs or strata, or could include even fee simple. So 12% is the absolute minimum. Next slide. Just to provide a bit of a summary, and it's really important to focus on these points, the Parks Plan reinforces the whole idea of the city's campus of parks. It's a great concept that has started here in Oakville, and it needs to continue, and that campus of parks also now needs to include appropriately scaled, appropriately designed, appropriately functional urban park system that will augment and complement the already great park system that you have. Again, I can't say it enough, the idea of all of this work is to make sure that the town of Oakville has the ability and opportunity to continue to achieve 2.2 hectares per 1,000 people, the number that was previously identified and is important to maintain. The last point here on this slide is really about that deadline. September 18th is rapidly approaching, and you need a bylaw in place, whatever it says, by that date. Next slide. This is my last slide. Some of the other things that come out of this parks plan, certainly that will go on beyond the adoption of a bylaw, is the need to consider some of the other recommendations of the parks plan and how that affects corporate work plans, corporate budgeting going forward. One of the recommendations is to do an acquisition strategy so that the municipality can be nimble enough to acquire lands as they become available that are appropriate for parks. Consideration of parkland maintenance strategies. This is really important in urban contexts. My experience on the ground is that urban parks, based on the usage that they get, basically need to be maintained to a level that's about 10 times what a suburban park is costing. That's related to garbage removal, cleanup, maintenance, making sure everything's in place, working properly in an urban context. And of course, the discussion about the 2.2 hectares per 1,000 people, it is time to have a look at your Parks, Recreation, and Library Services Master Plan, as I said, to either confirm or change that standard going forward based on part of the discussion of acquisition and an understanding of how cash in lieu will be generated through the development approval process. And with that, I'm happy to try and answer as many questions as you can, as I can. The hard ones, I will ask for some help from staff and from my friend Matt Bennett, but happy to try my best.
Thank you, Mr. Palmer. I think you made everything perfectly clear, as the expression goes. We're going to hear questions first from Councillor Grant and then Councillor Lischina.
And thank you very much. Can everybody hear me? Okay, great. Councillor Noel and I have worked very hard with our town park staff to bring a master plan to change to make sure that College Park has a trinity, that we make the parks better. We are now looking at doing that program to take it forward to River Oaks, so that all these older parks that we have in our community are going to be new again, because again, we are very old in some cases. As much as I appreciate what you're talking about with our new program, I'm hoping that nothing that you are suggesting would hurt that program.
My apologies, I heard very little of that.
Councillor Grant,
okay.
it may
sorry
be
about
that you need to be even closer to your special microphone there.
Okay, sorry. How are we doing now?
It's a little bit better.
Okay. Sorry, I'm using an old headset here.
That's a little better for me.
Okay. So what I was asking was that Councillor Noel and I have been working on a program in College Park to make older parks newer, and we are looking to move that to. Do people not hear me still, or?
I'm hearing you better, but anything you can do to be louder would be great.
Hey, buddy. Now we're better.
Councillor, are you asking if we are going to continue to work to renew our older parks?
Well, sorry. Yes, we are looking at a concern where we are having a program right now that works to make sure that our older parks get done.
Right.
That they are made new again.
Right,
And
Counselor, I think I can help you.
Okay,
The renewal of our older parks is part of a different source of funding. This is about, as a matter of fact, what this could have been named this evening is the Parkland Development Contribution Plan and Bylaw. And it is literally what we're going to charge builders for new parks. In other in other processes and procedures, we deal with renewing of older parks. Does that help?
that was what I was asking, and I'm sorry for my technical problems, but yes, thank you so much. Yes.
Okay, you're
That's
welcome.
what I was asking.
Councillor Lischina.
Sorry about that. Can you hear me now? Okay.
That I can hear.
So, hello. Now I could even hear myself. Thank you very much for the presentation. So my point is I'm a bit confused about the bylaw and the procedure part with respect to the priorities. So I noted that you have the 4 priorities, which is what we initially asked a number of months back about acquiring land directly in the area where the building's going to happen versus 400 meters away and that kind of thing. So for those priorities, could they be combined? Could you have a partial 1 and a partial 2? Or would it just be, if you can't do 1, you have to go to 2, and you can't do 2, you go to the next?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it's a good question. The bylaw establishes an amount, and particularly within the strategic growth areas, it is an amount that is intended to cover a certain amount of land within the strategic growth areas, a certain amount of land acquisition in proximity to the strategic growth areas, and then a certain amount of land anywhere else in the town. So the inherent priority is implied through the number that has been generated. And I think that within the, and I don't want to get it correct what I called it, the acquisition strategy, I think that that's where you start to think about how you're going to use that cash that you generate and what your priorities for that money are. It doesn't necessarily need to be part of the statutory bylaw, because if it's in the statutory bylaw, if you want to make adjustments, you have to change the bylaw. So if it remains as part of an acquisition strategy or part of a procedural document, it gives you the flexibility to be more opportunistic to where land may be available to acquire, when it is available to be acquired.
So can I ask for a follow-up? I guess I'm asking for an example. So if the amount of land that is available in the SGA, for example, and that's an established amount that we have, and we can't get that much, what we could get a quarter of it, does that mean you get a quarter of the park and the rest is cash in lieu? Or do you see what I'm saying? For that amount of, with respect to the direct area and then 400 meters away, they're all different amounts. So that's why I'm confused.
Councillor, that decision would be made at the time. It's not being made in this bylaw. So I know it's
Just the amounts are. Okay,
that's right.
Thank you.
We're just here to establish that we want the maximum amount permitted by the provincial legislation. And we're preserving to council's discretion later all those kinds of decisions.
Yep, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Giddings.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for the presentation. When it you mentioned the 12%, and it appeared that you thought that was a pretty good number. Do you have comparators or other municipalities that we may be aware of that where they would be in the ranking?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'll just be a second because I want to refer to some of the work that we did carry out. We looked at some urban centers from across North America, first of all. And we wanted to have a look at the bigger pieces of Parkland that are identifiable and measurable. So we did that, and that's on page 41 of the report, and it's part of an appendix, a little bit more detail in the appendix. So we started with 12% as a minimum, and if you look at the ones that I looked at, 12% is about the top of the range. So we felt it was a good starting point. Then we asked staff to tell us, in terms of your own planning exercises, uptown, midtown, Palermo, downtown Oakville, et cetera. This is on page 42. What kind of land areas were you generating there? And again, it ranges from 18.8% down to, I'm going to say, 8. So again, we felt that the 12 was acceptable, but the 12 is a minimum. And in the strategic growth areas, with the exception of downtown Oakville, which has the highest already existing, we are also asking for an additional, in the procedures, an additional 5% that would be on individual development sites. Those would be the smaller elements that we're looking for. So again, the 12% in my mind are the larger scale parks that are incorporated into master plan elements, secondary plans and so on at the town of Oakville. And then there will be an additional requirement for on-site dedications of the smaller elements. So we did do some background work. We did look at what the town of Oakville has been achieving over time. And our assessment was that what we've done with the 12% and then the additional 5 on the larger sites would generate an excellent, robust urban park system.
Thank you for that. Not all of our residents made their full amount of the way through the 300 pages. So
okay.
Just wanted them to be able to hear. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Giddings. That's often a useful thing to point out, is what's deep in the document. We seem to have exhausted council's questions, and so now, Madam Clerk, would you call the first registered delegation?
First delegation is Chris Kolichuk.
Mr. Kowalchuk, welcome. Council looks forward to your information.
Hello?
Hello, Chris.
Hello?
Hello.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you very well, Chris. You have 10 minutes, and as always at council, it's appreciated if you stick to the topic before us, which is how much shall we, will we adopt this plan to maximize the funding we can get from development for Parkland or not?
Well, I just wanted to confirm, but I'll be brief. The last meeting I attended was before the meeting, special meeting with the developers regarding accepting 4% as a community benefit charge. Ira from Build had said that Build was not, that 4% was fine. So I'm just want to be clear, that was dealt with at the last meeting, and it is confirmed that 4% is the community benefit charge for Parkland within this park and open space plan. That is it. But we still have a 0.9% shortfall. And if I'm not mistaken, you made the meeting to accept it because it enable you to get 11 or 12 million dollars that you otherwise wouldn't get without the 4%, even though there is a shortfall. Did I summarize that at all remotely correct?
Well, thank you. I don't know, Commissioner or Mr. Palmer, which one of you is best suited to handle that question?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the delegate. As I understood the question, he was referring to the CBC charge, which is not part of tonight's discussion. So, and that was adopted by council at the last meeting, and it was 4%, and it does represent a shortfall, as council will recall.
Well, Mr. Kowalchuk, I hope that helps you. Is
It does,
there,
and I apologize, I wasn't sure, and I just knew that it was, because the last time I came, the Parks plan was being discussed in conjunction with the CBC, and I wasn't sure if it was the direct connection, so. Thank
Okay,
you very much, that answers my question, and thank you very much for your time.
thank you very much. See you soon. Bye.
See you soon, bye-bye.
Madam Clerk, the next delegation, please.
The next delegation is Teresa Ball and Elizabeth Chalmers on behalf of the JCRA.
Ms. Ball and Ms. Chalmers, council looks forward to seeing and hearing you. And you're not on mute. Welcome.
Yeah, good. Just going to open up my screen so I can see everyone when I'm speaking. Terry won't be joining us tonight. She was out of town for several days, so she's like getting back to Oakville. So it'll just be myself. We thank you for the opportunity to speak to this report tonight. We also thank planning staff for the very comprehensive report. As Councillor Giddings said, there are things buried, and we certainly can't, sometimes can be difficult to see everything, but the detail is excellent, and they've been very specific in many areas. We also appreciate that they took the time to meet with residents associations on short notice earlier in August. So we're appreciative of all of that. The reason why JCR wanted to speak tonight and to provide our feedback is, we are fortunate in our neighborhoods to have easy access to parks and green spaces. And we wanted to ensure that the same access to parks and green spaces are available to future Oakville residents as the town moves forward with our provincially mandated intensification. First point that we wanted to make is one that I think everyone is aware of and acknowledged in the staff report. The green space is essential for the health of all residents. And to that end, we believe that land acquisition for local green space should be a top priority to ensure equal and fair geographic distribution of green parkland across the town, including in the designated strategic growth areas. Green spaces shouldn't be considered frills. They're important for residents. They're a key element in the livability in Oakville that we've always enjoyed in the time for those people that are currently residents. We don't think that all of those green spaces should be replaced with concrete parks or gray parks, such as pocket parks, sliver parks, the connectors, etc. Not because we're opposed to having squares or concrete, but if the only type of parkland available is concrete, then it doesn't provide the green space that I think residents would want to have in their area. Secondly, I'm just going to go quickly through points because I did send in something in writing, but I don't want to read it verbatim to you tonight. I think it's important that every action we take in our town reflects concern about climate change. And Oakville to date has been a proponent of less concrete and asphalt. We've regulated driveway widths, we've promoted rainwater diversion, we've encouraged flood mitigation strategies wherever possible. And so those guiding principles should be embedded in recommendations for green spaces in the strategic growth areas. Thirdly, we're just talking about the percentage of parkland in strategic growth areas. The range in the draft report is 7.5 to 12%, where opportunities exist. And I think that's something that we need to consider. If it's only available where opportunities exist, it might be difficult to get it. Why are green spaces not being designated first when it comes to the planning for developments in strategic growth areas, or any area really, as opposed to an afterthought? Again, to this end, a parkland acquisition strategy where the town considers buying land in advance of the site plan applications to ensure that green space is in these designated areas would be advantageous for future residents and of course for current residents as well. It certainly appears based on the finance department reports presented in previous meetings that there are funds available, and I can't imagine that residents wouldn't think that's a good use of those funds. When in the draft report, based on the comments received from the development community, it appears that they are proposing less than the 2.2 hectare target because we've already achieved a higher target. Again, in the report that I read earlier in August, and maybe they've changed it, they had a target of just 1.4 hectares for future development. And such a method of calculation is going to create two Oakvilles, right? Neighborhoods and communities with accessible and more than satisfactory green space, and others with much less and possibly not within walking distance as well. So again, a parkland acquisition strategy and perhaps a target specific to strategic growth areas that ensures green spaces in those areas should be considered within the context of the bylaw. And you know what, something else that I think we need to look at, so I'm going to be specific to Midtown for my next point. We've got a park on Cornwall Road. I can't remember the name of it, the sports park, I guess the Cornwall Sports Park, playground, baseball field, etc. It's a good sized park. I'm not sure exactly how much open parkland there is. But if this park is considered to be part of Midland and gets included in parkland calculation for Midtown, then it's going to further reduce the amount of parkland that would be included with the developments. So for example, the two condo buildings at the northeast corner, currently on the Beertown Indigo property. Yes, it's not that far, but it's not really that accessible. And it certainly wouldn't be accessible to Midtown developments on the other side of Trafalgar Road. So we need to consider that existing parkland may not be appropriate to be included when we're looking at some of these strategic growth areas. With respect to the POPs and the strata parks, it's our view that these spaces should not be included in parkland calculations, as they may not be permanent solutions. They may not be accessible to all residents, and there are potential issues around the maintenance and future development of them. So it seems that they would actually add an element of uncertainty into available parkland for residents. We also noted a recommendation in the draft report for residents associations to assist in maintenance of parks and green spaces. I'm not sure that residents associations or community groups are appropriate when it comes to park maintenance. Certainly, I think you're all aware that there are cleanups across town and many residents associations, including JCRA, participate in them. But on an ongoing, regular basis, it doesn't seem appropriate that community groups would be doing that type of activity. And then the final comment we had was that in the report, there's a recommendation that the directors of planning, parks and open space would have responsibility, sole responsibility for negotiating parkland dedication or payment in lieu agreements. This would mean that there's never any input from council or any regular ongoing public participation in the types of parks created, their locations, and decisions on parkland or cash in lieu of parkland. And that's not necessarily in the best interest of any residents in the town of Oakville to never have that opportunity for public input, for feedback. Oakville's always done an excellent job of ensuring that there is an opportunity. And so I think that's something that needs to be under consideration, even if it's something like the existing bylaw that permits site plan applications to come to council and thereby provide an opportunity for public input. That's not a regular ongoing thing, but it is an opportunity that can be used if needed. So that's something to consider in terms of who will be making, where the decision making will sit. And finally, you receive letters from both the Trafalgar Chartwell Residents Association and Coronation Park. And we at the JCRA support their comments, their feedback, their statements. And in particular, we wanted to articulate our support for the suggestions for acquisition of green park spaces made by Coronation Park, including creating partnerships with educational and other institutions, leveraging the rail and hydro corridors, using the town's majority position in Oakville Enterprises or Oakville Hydro to determine any additional real estate holdings that could be transitioned to green space, doing the same for Oakville's bank of real estate assets, and then considering how to improve and integrate the street design and the other town-owned land adjacent to parks or recreation areas. And something that I didn't put in here, but it's come into my mind since listening to, I believe it was Mr. Palmer earlier, with respect to pocket parks, sliver parks, et cetera. You know, the concern is that they're concrete. Why can't they be grass? Why do connecting links have to be concrete? Why do sliver parks have to be concrete? Why can't they be grass? So that we can increase the amount of green space within the strategic growth areas that I would certainly be well used by many residents. Anyway, that's it. You have my written copy if you wanted more information, and I thank you for your time. If you have any questions for me.
Thank you very much, Ms. Chalmers, for your many suggestions. There are questions, as it happens, from Councillor Giddings and Councillor Haslett-Deal. Councillor Giddings.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This isn't a question for Ms. Chalmers. It's a question for staff to answer one of her queries regarding the residents associations being possibly tapped to assist, as well as the BIAs. The JCRA are very talented at building outdoor ice rinks now, but I don't know whether they'll excel at looking after parks during the summertime as well. So could you clarify that a little bit for us?
Through you, Mayor Burton, to Councillor Giddings. Councillor Giddings, I think that's just something that's in the plan to explore as a potential down the road. We have a number of adoption programs that we offer throughout the town, be it trails, be it parks. Ms. Chalmers mentioned about the cleanups that's done by JCR as well every year. So I think we just put in there that in other jurisdictions, there has been good partnerships that have been established between BIAs, between residents associations that have worked. We put that out there simply as an option, a possibility, not something that we're going to be, demanding, so to speak. It's out there to explore, I think, as we move down the road.
So possibly an expansion of the ambassador program or the Trail Watch program, or any one of a number of initiatives where they tie the residents and the associations into it.
Yeah, we feel the more eyes that are on a park, the better. So that is a possibility for that as well.
Thank you.
Councillor Haslett-Deal.
Thank you, Mayor Burton. Ms. Chalmers, thanks very much for wading through the reports and for attending a couple meetings to learn more about the parks plan. I just want to make sure that your question and concern around input on parks is addressed by the staff. So perhaps Director Charles could just give us some assurance that there is an opportunity for public input in regards to park land allocation on a development site, that it comes forward through the development process, that where potential park could be, either on the site or neighboring the site. And I'm going to specifically use an SGA as that framework.
Thank you, Councillor, and through you, Mr. Mayor. through the development applications that council will be seeing, and when staff make presentations to council on the overall design of the development concept, council does have that ability to provide input and feedback in terms of how parks are designed, or at least the amount of land that's being allocated for park space. Similarly, when staff are bringing forward our planning exercises, growth area reviews like Midtown, for example, there are opportunities through those endeavors for council to provide feedback in terms of park design, typology, sizes, that type of stuff. So there's certainly a public process which is involved through those endeavors when we bring those back to council.
Okay, thank you for that. And I guess I'll just close by saying thank you for the excellent suggestions and call outs. One of the good news is that the movement from the draft report to the final report, we did get up to 12%, which is a request that the RAs have, and I thank the staff for listening to their concern on that.
Thank you, Councillor Haslett-Deal. Councillor Duddick?
Thank you. Through you, Your Worship. Pardon me. Similar to what the previous speakers had raised as a result of your delegation, Ms. Chalmers, and I do appreciate several of the key comments, especially pertaining to the pocket parks and the sliver parks. I share that concern. I guess the reason I want to get some clarification is that from what I've read in the report, it's saying this is a recommendation that's being considered. It's not going forward. It's just saying they're raising, we should maybe look at this in the bigger scheme. And I guess my question is, when does it come back? What is the process by which the public can expect to see that come back and discuss it? It may be premature, but I want to frame it so that they know when they'll be able to participate in that process. You drew the short straw.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So I think, Councillor, if I heard the question correctly, the other subsequent recommendations that are in the Parks Plan, when would the public be able to provide some input on those? Did I understand that correctly?
That's it. That's it.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, I think it would really depend on what those recommendations are. There's a variety of recommendations that are within the Parks Plans. Some we will be exploring more quickly, such as looking at a parkland acquisition strategy. So when we will be providing recommendations to council, that there could be a public process associated with that in terms of the public being able to delegate on those items. Some of the other recommendations are a little bit longer term. Some we may not pursue at all. Again, the Parks Plan really is that forward-looking document that is a strategic document that we can use to tailor the different work plans that we have ongoing. There's some in there which we'll be using immediately, even through the Parks, Recreation, Library Services Master Plan as well. So I know that doesn't directly answer your question from a timing perspective, but it will be dependent on what those different recommendations are.
I guess, and thank you for the answer, because you've clarified, I guess, what I'm concerned members of the public may have is that you had indicated some things may not even be brought forward for consideration. They've just been raised in the context of the report. Some of them are longer term, some of them are shorter term. But if and when you do think something has merit and want to bring it back for council's consideration, there'll be ample opportunity for people to delegate and comment similar to what they're doing this evening.
Thank you, Councillor Duddick. I'd like to point out as well remind everyone, council has a mechanism called a request for report. At any time, council could decide on its own that there's a feature in the Parks Plan that they'd like explored, and by a request for report, initiate that initiate that work and consultation. So at no time does this plan tie council's hands. This Parks Plan and this bylaw exist for only one reason, and that's to maximize the parkland money that we can acquire for maintaining our great parkland standards in this town. That's all that's here tonight.
Your Worship, I appreciate the additional comments, and I guess that is my concern, that members of the public want to get some sort of understanding how some of these recommendations, whether they do come to fruition or don't, it still can take many forms. So thank you for that.
That's right. Council has a myriad of methods to move the town's business forward. Commissioner Garby or Mr. Palmer, is there anything in the material before us tonight that will require sliver parks and POPs to be concrete?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, there's nothing in this park that specifies any type of design of any of the parks. And certainly the content of sliver, park it, and even our large parks will be determined at a future process, through a future process. And as always, it's open to the public.
Thank you, Commissioner. The next questioner is Councillor Pavan Palmer. Councillor Palmer.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Ms. Chalmers, for your delegation. There's a couple of points that you hit on in speaking today that I can certainly share concern with in terms of the sliver parks and the POPs, but a conversation that Councillor Sandu and I have often had with staff as well in regards to our areas in Ward 7 that are growth areas is the maintenance of these areas that we're including into our parkland, so trails and stormwater management ponds. Although they're accessible and beautiful in the summer, often our residents are left unable to use them in the winter because we're not plowing them and they're not accessible. And that's a large part of being livable. So I hope that staff will turn their mind to those comments that were made today, and that we include not only the design of these future parks, but also the maintenance that we'll be providing for them. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor, for that contribution. Madam Clerk, would you call the next delegation?
The next delegation is John Shield.
Welcome, Mr. Shield. Council looks forward to your comments as long as you're commenting on the matter before us. The rules here are that delegation has to stick to the topic before council.
I understand fully. I moved to an area in Oakville that's next door to a thing called the Parkway, which is 100 acres, which probably, like by the formulas I heard today, I'm already talking on the phone. I wanted to establish something first. Is that possible to stop the clock? Because I was going to offer you asking questions while I was talking, because it's very complicated.
Mr. Shield,
okay.
You're already off topic.
Okay, I'm not off topic. I wanted to offer you some questioning ability, but now you're counting me already. That's not fair. I just wanted to be open to you. It's a very complicated topic, and if you want to ask a question, I don't mind, but then don't use the clock.
Mr. Shield, you have the balance of your 10 minutes to speak to the topic.
Slide, please. Okay. I looked at the Parkway. It's a parkland.
Mr. Shield, this is out of order. We are not here discussing dumps of any kind. We're here discussing a bylaw to raise money to acquire parkland.
I understand.
Do you have comments on the bylaw?
No, but I just heard words like maintenance of the parklands and this and that. I'm talking about all of that.
No, you're not.
Okay, you're going to disallow me to talk then?
I am.
Okay, then I'm going to come back.
Very well. If you can't stick to the topic, you're out of order.
I've tried for 4 years to make you
off.
people understand something about dumps and toxic dumps in East Oakville, and you won't listen. I just want that on the record. Okay?
Mr. Shield,
Thank you very
you're
much.
out of order.
Thank you very much. We'll be back with more people.
Madam Clerk, would you call the next registered delegation?
The next delegation is Karen Brock on behalf of Oakville Green.
Ms. Brock, welcome. Council looks forward to your information.
Good evening. Thank you. Let me just pull up my notes here. I think I'll start by saying that, first of all, I'm Karen Brock. I'm representing Oakville Green Conservation, which is one of Oakville's largest residents associations. And I think I just wanted to start by sort of emphasizing the importance of parks. And I'll be paraphrasing from park people who claim that they activate the power of parks to improve the quality of life in cities across Canada. So I think quality of life is important to us here in Oakville. They did a survey and said that 86% of Canadians live in cities, and more Canadians live alone than ever before. So the potential of parks to impact many of the challenges of urban life make them more relevant now than ever. And I know there was a distinction between suburban and urban, but I think it's pretty safe to say that we are basically now stepping into urban lifestyle here in Oakville, no matter whether we're a city or a town. Park people just released a platform called Toronto Parks as Core Urban Structure, which could just as well be Oakville Parks as core urban structure. And certainly that's our belief at Oakville Green, that green space is a key part of urban infrastructure. And as Elizabeth said, they shouldn't be afterthoughts. And you'll notice a similar theme in the next paragraph, and I quote from Parks people: "Parks are not nice to haves. They are critical social, health, and environmental infrastructure for our communities. Municipal parks are lifelines in extreme heat waves. Think of our last, how we survived this past summer. They're social connectors in an age of increasing polarization. They're keepers of biodiversity despite ever-fragmenting urban landscapes. To meet the biggest challenge we face in Oakville, climate change, biodiversity loss, social polarization, rising inequality, we need whole new ways to plan, design, manage, program, and govern parks." And I do want to say that Oakville Green is a very happy partner and works very closely with Parks and Open Space to do what we do. And we work with the town and we bring in our volunteers. But it's absolutely imperative that we invest in the co-benefits of parks for climate resilience and adaptation, nature connection, and biodiversity. And I guess it may be buried in that 300-page report that, and I, for one, have not read it, and I probably am pretty representative of most residents of Oakville have not read that 300-page report. But we know that parks mitigate climate impacts and are key to climate adaptation. So we can't sort of put parkland in a silo. We have to look at them in a different way than we ever have before. And I think it goes without saying that in the GTA, we'll need to adapt to hotter, wetter, more unpredictable climates. Climate change is here and already impacting our cities. With the right investment, parks can serve as climate infrastructure and provide people with critical places of refuge in hot, dense cities where a major health crisis is looming. I think a really good example that they cite is Toronto's Corktown Common, which is designed to manage flooding. But a lot of these parks are the exception, not the rule. So we're not thinking of a few trees in a grassy field like we did in the past. We really have to seriously incorporate the issues like the heat island effect and flooding. But I think Park People cites, most importantly, that people are seeking out nature more for its mental and physical health benefits. People want more places to experience nature close to home. This is what COVID has taught us. You've heard it a lot recently. And 71% of the survey respondents that Park People sent out a survey, they said they value visiting naturalized spaces within a 10-minute walk of homes, such as native plant gardens or a small meadow. And they said that 87% of the respondents said they were in favor of more native plant species within parks. Again, we're all for that. And the second most requested amenity, it was the second most requested amenity after public washrooms. They go on to talk about the Toronto's ravine strategy. And again, I think that is a wonderful idea for Oakville to develop a ravine strategy. But of course, there's always the issue of funding. But as Elizabeth said, naturalized spaces have to improve climate resilience, urban biodiversity habitat, and vital nature connections. But cement does not do that. And we really, really want to emphasize that green infrastructure, there's urban infrastructure, there's gray infrastructure like roads and bridges, but green infrastructure is something that we really have to emphasize. There's going to be a lot of increased pressure on our sensitive habitats, our natural heritage system. So how do we, ensure that biodiversity and natural habitats are safeguarded, yet still allow people to use these spaces? I think too, no matter where we live, and Oakville, I think is obviously a well-to-do community, but I think there still needs to be a prioritization for investment in equity-deserving neighborhoods that have lower levels of green space and tree canopy. And we don't want to see people, Oakville Green is certainly in favor of intensification. We know that it preserves farmland and green space, and really applaud the town's decision in sticking with, holding the line on urban expansion and sprawl. But we also know that tall is not the answer, and we certainly do not want to be warehousing people in tall towers, not providing any space for them. The City of Waterloo released its draft Parkland strategy in June 2019. City of Toronto Parkland strategy, they released their final report in November 2019. Really even mentioned in the consultant's report. Think of how helpful these two studies would have been by providing current and local ideas, not in New York or in California. Obviously, the City of Waterloo and Toronto were onto this earlier. I guess to me, that's the elephant in the room. If we knew this had to be done starting in 2016, what happened? I know COVID intervened in a little bit of that, but I think what's really lacking, and I think there was an 11th hour meeting of the residents associations, and certainly I was happy to be a part of that in August. But I think what's really missing is robust understanding of what this parkland strategy means, and robust input into what our parks are going to look like. And parks are critical to our quality of life, and I think a lot of people understand that. And it's not just after hours when people come home from work. City of Toronto cites 63% of employees use parks during their workday. So we need to really be investing in sincere conversations with people who live in our community. And I think I'll conclude by saying that new residents need parks within a short walk, not on the other side of town. Statistics from City of Toronto support that. And I expect you'll see that when you speak to residents. We don't want people getting in their cars to drive to a park. I mean, that is, in these days of climate change, it's just ridiculous. So no matter where people choose to live, they have the right to have parkland close by. Parks are vital, and I'm talking for not only the current residents, but future residents. So get folks outside. That's what Oakville Green does best. Get people out of their cars. We must invest in the co-benefits of parks for climate resilience and adaptation, and nature connection and biodiversity. We cannot fault developers for trying to maximize their return on their investment. That's their business model. And it's interesting that they had a chance to talk with the town in July. But the key group on the front line of the parkland issue is the council. It's you're the only ones with the power and the moral authority to ensure livability for current and future citizens. Council needs to defend the need for parks, and we need to maximize that. It's time. We're on the brink of a big change, and change is inevitable. Growth is going to happen, but this is just such a critical time to ensure that parks are incorporated into that ultimate plan.
Thank you very much, Ms. Brock, for your information and your wholehearted endorsement of making sure we can charge as much money as possible for our parkland future. As for
can't put a price on parkland. Certainly, right. It only gets more expensive later.
Well, Yes, but I will tell you that the province has put 2 lids on the price of parkland. The minimum we'll be forced to if we don't do this, and this, which is the most they'll allow.
Yeah,
But also, thank you.
I understand the provincial pressures, but again, I think we still have a moral responsibility to do our utmost. I think it's pretty safe to say that those pressures don't create for a lot of fairness to the environment, and we really have to push.
I'm referring solely to the choice between the price that is the minimum and the price that is the maximum. I take it you're in favor of the maximum.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Brock, for your delegation. Council, I would just note that, because it seems like it may need to be repeated again, that what parks will look like is determined later in council's work. It's not being determined tonight. The list of park types is not a list of park designs. It's merely, it's a list of what we're going to charge for, and the designs will come later. Council, is there, Councillor Adams?
I guess we've finished with our delegations, and you might be looking for a motion to move us forward.
Councillor Elgar, I now realize, had his hand up. Councillor Elgar.
Excellent, then I'll let him.
Okay, I finally got it unmuted. Thank you. Through Mayor Burton, I'd be pleased to move the staff recommendation to get it on the floor that we have before us. So I think, and also I believe that Councillor Giddings has amendments he would like to make to the motion, which I think would be in order. So with that,
yes. Thank you, Councillor. Let me first look for a seconder for your motion. Councillor Adams, thank you. Councillor Giddings.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thanks, Councillor Elgar. You should have item number 6 in front of you or on your screen. And for the public, I'd like to read that out, if I may, Mr. Mayor. I'm asking for my colleagues' support on this amendment that staff.
We're going to try and put it up.
Oh, perfect.
If everyone will relax for 1 second, I believe the clerks may be able to display your amendment on the screen.
All right, and I'll read along with it. How's that?
If it gets there. I have this deep faith in our technology that isn't always met, but I think we have an overhead camera, and I think we have a place to put it there. And the clerks will accommodate us as soon as they can. Hey, it's coming. I think. Councillor Giddings, we're on our way here. I think we all may even be able, well, we don't see it all, but I think we all can read it. Am I right?
All right, if I could, I'd like to go through it.
I'd like you to.
All right. I hope it was worth the wait for my council colleagues. The 6th point will be that staff conduct public consultation on the Parkland procedure so that all members of council will have an opportunity to consult with and hear from their constituents on the comments and concerns by members of council at this meeting, including but not limited to how and when the public is informed of parkland locations and types and/or cash in lieu for each development application, including SGAs, strategic growth areas. How and when council determines location of parkland and use of cash in lieu for purchase of parkland. How council can balance parkland needs of strategic growth areas and the rest of the town. How often council should review its parkland dedication bylaw. How soon staff can conduct a review with public consultation of the design guidelines for connecting links, sliver parks, urban squares, and promenades to maximize green space standards for council's review and approval. What matters should be included in the 2023 review of the Parks Recreation Library Master Plan, in addition to fair distribution of park types, sizes, walking distances, and community services. And lastly, should the town, and if so, how, develop partnerships for parks with neighborhood associations and BIAs?
Thank you, Councillor Giddings. Is there a seconder for your amendment? Councillor Haslett-Deal, thank you for seconding the amendment. It would be in order to vote on the amendment now. Is there an objection to the amendment? Madam Clerk, there is no objection to the amendment. It carries unanimously. May I put the vote on the main motion as amended? Is there an objection to the main motion as amended? Madam Clerk, there is no objection. I declare it carried unanimously. Thank you, everybody. The next business before this council meeting is just the consideration and reading of the bylaws, and that is the confirmatory bylaw and the bylaw to require the conveyance of parkland or the payment in lieu of parkland pursuant to the Planning Act, the main matter that brought us here. Councillor Longo, thank you for the motion. Councillor Chisholm, thank you for seconding. Is there any objection? Madam Clerk, the bylaws are considered read and adopted. Council, this has been a really important meeting. The financing and affordability and even the amount of future parks is going to be established here. And Oakville has chosen to go for the maximum, as we always do when it comes to parks, and not the minimum. And I hope that the discussion tonight has helped people understand the matter that was before us, and that a lot of work lies ahead of us, full of public consultation and opportunities for input. And that concludes the work of this meeting. Thank you, everybody, for your time and attention. It has been terrific working with you.